A psychologist's view: why you mustn't chase in relationships. This behavior is deeper than you think. In my clinic, I see people chase all sorts of things. They chase the next big business venture, the next drug high, the big win, the next great relationship, and on it goes. Chasing has been associated with a need for dopamine. But as research has suggested, the more we chase, the more we want. Since there is no saturation point, you will at some point find yourself chasing for the sake of the high provided by the chasing itself. When chasing happens in a relationship, it is rarely a sign that you are part of a balanced and mutually satisfying relationship. Rather, it tends to be symptomatic of imbalance, mixed messages, and, more often than not, at least one person who is failing to see their own worth. In this brief article, I'm hoping to help I can persuade a few such people to take control of their behavior and channel their energy into relationships where there is no need for chasing. These are relationships that will nourish you and be reflective of your emotional investment. Some similarities to the field of addiction. In my clinical area of expertise, gambling addiction, the phenomenon of chasing is ever present and highly destructive. A gambler will enjoy the anticipation and buildup of the gamble session, often more so than the actual gambling as it happens. While gambling, there might be a win, which means the addicted gambler gets excited about the win but simultaneously craves a continuation of the high. Alternatively, there will be a loss, in which case the loss typically triggers negative sensations that also will give rise to a desire to avoid and numb the feeling with further gambling. There will also be an increasing desperation to get back what was lost. This, plus the thrill of the unpredictable outcome, will keep people locked in a loop where they gamble more to end their gambling problems. The mind will construct clever reasons as to why it makes sense to try one more time. Any attempt to disrupt the gambling mid-cycle will likely give rise to unpleasant cravings. This experience in itself is hard to sit with, and hence the draw to re-engage in the activity of gambling feels temporarily like a more sensible thing to do. When you chase in relationships, you fail to see the woods for the trees. In the context of relationships, you will find that the chasing behaviors end up taking on a life of its own. Chasing here can equate to calling, texting, emailing, and/or obsessing about someone from whom you have either had a bit of attention or in some situations a full-on relationship, but one that is not fully reciprocated. You might even have experienced the loss of a relationship, but often without the opportunity of closure or understanding. As discussed in previous articles I wrote on Medium, the intermittent reinforcement provided by unpredictable or lopsided relationships can spur the chase on even more. Deeper reasons for chasing. 1. Lack of self-worth induces chasing and also maintains the need for it. When you chase, you risk overvaluing the person you chase simply because of the highs and lows you experience whilst bidding for their attention. In the early phase of a relationship, we can kind of understand that the anxious anticipation of a text, initiative for a date, etc. can be a bit exciting. It might make you feel like you won the lottery when you hear back, and as if the feeling makes up for all the time spent in the agony of uncertainty. Whilst this process can feel fairly addicting, you want to keep your attention on the following. In the long term, chasing someone will destroy your self-worth. Why? Because you are acting as if you are undeserving of them already from the time you are chasing them for attention. Whether you feel worthy or not right now, you need to act like someone who deserves a person to love you and commit to you in an unaided fashion. Anything else will result in them relating to you as though you are somehow less important than they are, or as someone who will settle for less than they deserve. Don't confuse what you want with what you need. In the hot chase for reciprocation, you will forget that the very basics of a relationship are found in the existence of mutual interest. Without that, you will never be at ease or at peace. Chasing in relationships tends to be associated with a want rather than a need. Nobody really needs a relationship where they are having to chase after the other person. Deeper reasons. 2. The reward dopamine system. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter in our brain implicated in many functions. Whilst it is often referred to as a pleasure chemical, it is so much more than that. Dopamine is involved with several functions including attention, sleep, mood, movement, and the seeking of pleasurable rewards. When released in the brain, we experience a sense of pleasure that causes us to want to seek out more of the behavior that caused it. Unpredictability and anticipation stimulate the dopamine system and make us want to pursue more of the behavior that we think will generate the reward. To make matters even more complicated, we also experience rewards differently depending on whether the reward is expected or not. This is something called prediction error in the clinical literature. To put it simply, we will be more excited and have a greater dopamine release when the reward is unexpected than we will if the reward is anticipated. This can explain why predictability is sometimes rated as boring in relationships, however healthy it actually is for it in the longer term. Further effects of dopamine. Because the release of dopamine feels exhilarating, it can easily create a delusion about what our priorities should be. This is because it contributes to a narrowing of attention towards the very thing that is contributing to its release. See, web scrolling as a perfect example of this. We just keep going, not because we enjoy it or because we don't know other things need to be done, but because it is the easiest way to obtain a little bit more dopamine. The search for another hit of dopamine can make you think preferentially about something that will create a good feeling now. A lot of the good stuff in life requires sustained attention, commitment, and work. The rewards are delayed, and we have to keep this in mind when we prioritize our current efforts, not least in a relationship that we would like to be part of for a long while to come. Liking versus wanting. According to researcher Kent Berridge, there are two systems, the wanting and the liking, and these two systems are complementary. Dopamine is part of the wanting system. It propels you to take action. The liking system makes you feel satisfied and therefore pauses your seeking. But the dopamine wanting system is stronger than the liking system. You tend to seek more than you are satisfied. You can get into a dopamine loop. If your seeking isn't turned off, at least for a little while, then you start to run in an endless loop. Quoted by Susan Weinschenk, PhD, see full reference at the bottom of the page. The addicting trance of chasing in a relationship. Chasing after someone gets you hooked on the act of chasing. If you need to chase, there is an overwhelming likelihood that you have already been exposed to some intermittent reinforcement. When we get rewarded on an unpredictable interval, which triggers dopamine just like in gambling, we experience a sense of further wanting. It is at this point that many people make the mistake of equating what they feel they need with what they actually need. In reality, the very fact that someone is being wishy-washy or uncertain in their commitment to you should be a turn-off, not a culprit for an extended chase. Their unpredictability ends up being like gasoline to the fire of your obsession. Similarly, to gamblers who develop cognitive distortions about their degree of control over the machine, you might just start believing that it is you rather than them that needs to find the magic combination that will unlock their true love for you. Ending the chase? No matter how great a person they are. Please note, I am not saying that the person you are chasing might not be fantastic in every way, but if they are not into you or fully committed to you, you may still have a problem. The fact you have to chase them means you are making them too important to you. A bit like chasing likes on, say, Instagram, you will realize soon enough that there is no saturation point. You are fueling a greed of the mind that will only grow bigger and more powerful the more it gets fed. It can cause a delusion as to what is actually a priority versus what is just a chase for another hit. End the chase now and know that you are doing something that will guarantee that you take your control back. Instead, keep your attention on the bottom line. A relationship is the natural result of two people who organically wish to be with one another. Chasing losses in love is the equivalent of chasing a falling knife in a crypto chart. It will be highly unlikely to end well. Whilst dopamine certainly facilitates the initial falling, in love with powerful feelings it gives rise to, do not confuse the feeling of dopamine rewards for love in the context of long-term relationships. A long-term relationship can, of course, give rise to many spikes of dopamine, however, requires a lot more than that. More importantly, the kind of situations that give way to peaks in dopamine are tied in with more wholesome interactions and behaviors. Without sounding pompous or trying to dictate to others what love is, I would argue that love is more than a feeling. A long-term relationship requires committed actions, presence, loyalty, and a willingness to show up, even when the rewarding feeling is not there at all. When you think of it in that way, it may be easier to understand why chasing a high is going to create a mudslide towards unhappiness, unfulfillment, and unrequited love. You deserve someone who wants to move towards you freely and happily.